Thanks, everybody. And what I would like to do is shift the field just a little bit. I'm coming at this from a very different kind of perspective. So my background is teaching religious education primarily, but also English and other things as well. But my qualification was chiefly in this area. So when I came to Deakin, and Deakin doesn't teach religious education, I found myself in the curriculum and pedagogy space, which I'm reasonably comfortable with, and hence my comments a little bit earlier about being not entirely in field, but not entirely out of field either. And so what I wanted to explore was this idea of what's it like to teach religious education as an out of field subject within the Australian context. As far as I can discern within the Catholic school sector, this is something that's highly under-researched. As in, I can find very little on this specifically in relation to out of field. But if you come across something or you know of something, I would be very, very interested and love to have a chat with you at some point. So in terms of what we mean by religious education, I'm talking about this as a learning area within the school. So it's distinct from faith formation. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about religious education as a subject area that has the same systematic demands and rigors as other disciplines might find within the curriculum. And that little definition comes from the National Catholic Education Commission here in Australia. So I've taken a very basic definition to begin with. By basic, I'm not downplaying that, but I haven't gone into the complexity that Fiona has, simply because there is very little that I can find around this. So I've used the two definitions there: a phenomenon where teachers are assigned to teach subjects for which they have inadequate training and qualifications, and building on that, teachers teaching subject areas, fields or year levels outside of their qualification or expertise. So the issue, it's a bit of an unknown space because while the term out of field has been applied in relation to other areas within the curriculum, it's not been applied or researched in connection to religious education, or RE, within the Australian context and specifically within the Catholic system. So from an educational perspective, as I said, RE is a scholastic discipline that has the same rigour and demands as other subjects. But in Australia, in the Catholic system, there's kind of a double whammy coming into play here, because from an ecclesial perspective, RE teachers are expected not only to have formal qualifications and accreditation to teach this subject, but they are also expected to a certain degree to be witnesses of Christian life. So this presents a real challenge where RE is taught as an out-of-field discipline by teachers who don't have those skills and qualifications. And secondly, where it's taught by teachers who are not necessarily witnesses to Christian life. And depending upon the school that you are in, particularly in regional and rural areas, this becomes a real challenge. So the pathways to accreditation, I wish I could give you a simple answer to this, but it's not simple, it's really complex, and it depends not only on which state you are physically located in within Australia, but it also depends upon the diocese that you are in. In Victoria, it's fairly common across the diocese. So we're looking in the table there, that the second box there is the accreditation to teach religious education or to lead in a Catholic school. And it requires, in terms of gaining those qualifications, it requires formal assessed study in religious education / theology / Catholic leadership within 5 years of being employed. And to maintain that, we're looking at 50 hours of professional learning or formation, balanced across a number of categories that appear below in those little the footnotes that are below there. So that's in the Victorian context. Other states and dioceses will have similar things, but they're all a little bit nuanced. So for instance, this is in the Diocese of Canberra and Goulburn. All teachers of religious education need to be Catholic, that's interesting, and demonstrate an ongoing commitment to their own faith journey, but they also need to have undergraduate studies that include a minimum of 6 approved units in religious education or theology at a tertiary level. So there's a little bit of difference there. Universities such as Australian Catholic University or the University of Notre Dame in Australia have initial teacher education units that satisfy the gaining of those gaining accreditation to teach religious education. But other universities don't have that. There are some smaller theological colleges that do provide that training, but again, they're usually offered as postgraduate units so that teachers who are coming into the profession and they're teaching out of field won't immediately have access to those. So this is why it becomes something of an issue. So what little do we know? Weldon's research shows that almost 40% of teachers who are teaching what he terms as religious studies were teaching this subject out of field. The tricky bit there is that what he means by religious studies is not entirely clear. There's a little bit of haziness around that term. Is he referring to the year 11 and 12 subjects, so that the final years of secondary school whereby there are state-based accredited courses, or is he referring to that something more broadly around that? So that's a little bit hazy, but 40% is quite a large percentage anyway. And the other thing is anecdotally, and I know there are problems around anecdotal incidences, but we know that in rural and regional areas, there are large numbers of teachers who, for various reasons, are not accredited to teach religious education, but nonetheless find themselves in schools whereby the principal have said, we'll give you the job, but will you take Year 9 RE? Or would love to have you as a maths teacher, you're fantastic, but will you also take Year 7 RE? So that becomes an issue there as well. So I do have a project that is about to get underway with some colleagues from the University of Notre Dame and the National Catholic Education Commission, but we're just in the process of getting ethics to do that. And so in the meantime, and to initiate the discussion a bit further, what I'd like to do with you this evening in Melbourne time is to offer you a couple of vignettes that distill some key points that we could elaborate on. And we've called these micronarratives that comes from the work of Reimers and Higgins. But also they can be termed as like the building blocks that create something of an overall experience. I've got 3 micronarratives to share with you, and I'm going to be very upfront here and say they're kind of being combined into 3. They're from different people, but they do come from anecdotally from different studies that I've done with colleagues that are not looking at out-of-field teaching specifically, but when I looked at what these people said, I could see the links that were there quite evidently and quite immediately. So I'd like to share those 3 anecdotes with you and then kind of draw together a couple of key things by way of initial research, because as I said, this is a field in which I can't find anything within the Australian context. So this will get the discussion going, if you like. So this is Damien. And Damien works in a Catholic school. He's a dedicated mathematics teacher and he's very happy working within the Catholic system. But he does have one reservation. In Catholic schools, religious education is a required subject and as such is taught on every line, meaning in every year level. It's offered several times a week, and this necessitates quite a demand for teachers in this subject, and here is where the dilemma arises. There are nowhere near enough RE teachers, so Damien, like many others, is required to teach RE so that he can fill his teaching load. He notes that I'm not a religious person, but I like my job, and so I do the best that I can when I have to teach RE. Note that there's an aspect of compulsion here. He's obliged to teach RE even though he himself has no background or training in the discipline. This comes with the job mentality, is typical of many teachers who find themselves teaching RE within his school and indeed within many Catholic schools. So that's Damien. This one is Jodie. Jodie is not from the region where she teaches, but she went back there when there came a job opening. She is an English teacher and she enjoys working in Catholic schools and is prepared, like Damien, to do what is necessary to teach in that system. This indicates a willingness to learn more about what is required of her as a teacher. Now, Jodie describes herself as Catholic, but with very tenuous connections to the church. Jodie did not attend a Catholic school after year 5 after primary school or elementary school in her own training. She did her teacher training at a secular university and does not have a strong familial connection with the church. As she puts it, my family are not that religious, so there are no pious grandparents, and the faith community is not her home turf and never really has been. She describes Christianity more in moral terms, that is, trying to be a good person or to have good morals, to have good values. She readily sees the need to know more, but this is reflective of her current disposition, which is a balance between the role that she has in her work in her Catholic school and her own personal worldview, which is very reflective of wider cultural influences. The reference point for her beliefs, values, and practices are the broader community, and that is where she sees herself as being at ease. And then we have Craig. Craig is an early career teacher. He is from the region where he teaches, and he was educated at the local Catholic school, which he describes as being a very positive experience. He trained at a regional university, and he has strong ties to that particular region. He comes from a Catholic background, and the town where he grew up in, his family are well known within that community, particularly his grandparents, who are regarded as stalwarts of the church. He describes his affiliation as being less intense than that of his grandparents. He is loath to describe himself as an active churchgoer, but he identifies as being Catholic. To Craig, being Catholic is strongly associated with having particular values. Less important to him are the more theological doctrines, which he can recall, but thinks that these don't really impact upon his own life. He enjoys working in a Catholic school, but he is not qualified to teach RE. But he is keen to know more, as he feels this will help him with his classroom practice. He feels well supported, although he would always like more support, especially that of being part of collaborative networks and the sharing of common resources. Craig makes the distinction between his schoolwork and his wider circle. There is some overlap between the school's community and the wider network, but in general, he sees them as being in quite different spheres. So let's just try and draw together a couple of key points that we might note here, or some salient points. So Damien is not religious. He's not qualified or accredited to teach RE, but he is a dedicated maths teacher. Jodie has some tenuous connections with religion in that she tries to be a good person with good morals and good values, but again is not qualified or accredited to teach religious education. Craig identifies as Catholic, but is not an active churchgoer, and again is not qualified, not accredited to teach RE. And these are common types of stories that you would get, particularly in regional and rural areas where those typically Catholic universities don't have a great reach into. So in the east coast of Australia, we've got Australian Catholic University. It has great reach into the city areas, but not so much into the regions. And the University of Notre Dame, its main campus is in Western Australia. So in Perth, you would have lots of teachers who come from there who would be accredited. But again, going out into those vast areas of Western Australia, many teachers are not going to have come from that university. So a couple of other things to note. Both Jodie and Craig want to know more, and they are looking for the school to provide some support to teach RE as an out-of-field subject. Damien does have reservations about teaching RE, but does the best that he can. All three will require additional support or additional training in order to be able to teach RE as an out-of-field subject. So the research that we are about to embark on is looking at what are the experiences of teachers in schools like Damien, like Jody, and like Craig. What are the kinds of support structures that are being offered to them from the school level and from the systems level, so from the Catholic schools offices that might operate in the diocese in which those teachers work, and how do they see themselves in terms of being an out of field teacher? And again, that is a term, and this has come up a couple of times this afternoon, a term that perhaps those teachers themselves may not be explicitly familiar with, but how do they see themselves? Do they see themselves as RE teachers? Or they see themselves as having to pick up this subject because they need to fill their load, or because the principal of the school has said, you can have the job here, but you need to take Year 9 RE as well, for instance. And so I think that there is a lot of research that's needed in this particular area to give it some credence and to be able to utilise some of the findings in some of the research that is out there at the moment more broadly, but applying that to religious education more specifically. And so I've just included some of the references at the end of the paper there. And the little diagram that I've got there is from the Diocese of Bathurst, which is in New South Wales in Australia. And it's interesting, one of their key things is just what they call designing a Christ-centred Australian curriculum. But yet most of the teachers who would teach in the Diocese of Bathurst would not have been to a university which has initial teacher education units in religious education to qualify them to teach. So I just thought that that was really interesting. So that would be one particular place that I would really like to get some teachers from, who would want to pride themselves on doing that. But at the same time, teachers in most of their schools would need significant levels of support to be able to implement such a curriculum. So thank you for letting me share that with you this afternoon. Really, really interested in any alignments that you might be able to see with maths or with English or with science, because I'm a big believer that that research will inform what we're doing here, even though it's a different curriculum area. And just any other comments that you may have. So I will stop sharing.